Hey everybody, I am talking today with Semiogogue, who I hope you all know. I've been on his channel a few times. This is the first time I've invited him on mine. Time to return the favor. Be sure to check out his channel link in the description and give him a sub. He more than deserves it. And I think he will prove that to you with his insights and intellect as we go through the stream today. So for anyone who doesn't know you, Semiogogue, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much for having me on. As you mentioned, you've been on my channel a number of times now. The first time was some years back. So we've known each other for a while. But yeah, this is my first time here. For those who are not familiar with me, I have two channels, one of which is current, one of which has some backed up material, Semiogogue, as well as a safer space. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on BitChute. You can find it on Odyssey, although I have to update the last few clips on Odyssey. You can also find me on Minds, though I'm not there much, Gab, and Twitter and Telegram are the most important ones. So if you wanted to minimize it, YouTube, Twitter, Telegram, and Odyssey would probably be the best bet. The channel looks into things like global politics and geostrategy, esoterica, symbolism, semiotics, that sort of thing.
Excellent. Thank you. And so I think we should maybe start with just kind of defining our terms here. We're here to talk about transhumanism. So, this is like a huge term and it seems to encompass a lot of different things. I grabbed Max Moore's definition. He's kind of one of the leading transhumanist thinkers. And he says, transhumanism is a blanket term given to the school of thought that refuses to accept traditional human limitations such as death, disease, and other biological frailties. Transhumans are typically interested in a variety of futurist topics, including space migration, mind uploading, and cryonic suspension. Transhumans are also extremely interested in more immediate subjects such as bio and nanotechnology, computers, and neurology. Transhumans explore the standard paradigms that attempt to render our world comfortable at the sake of human fulfillment. What do you think of that? Would you agree with that? It's obviously a fairly positive spin on that.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and state my bias at the outset. I am deeply suspicious of all things quote unquote transhumanist. The only thing I'm more suspicious of than all things transhumanist is people who claim to be transhumanists. So you're not going to find much sensitivity or interest in this philosophy from my direction. Yeah, it sounds like a very, very strong positive spin for what to me seems to be two things. It seems on the one hand to be an attempt to connect whatever this is, whatever this transhumanism is, and hopefully we'll discover what that is in the course of our discussion, or come at it from a few angles. I'm no expert on this topic, by the way, but it seems to be a way to connect all of this, whatever it is, to any number of perfectly reasonable developments in the past, whether these are in biology or chemistry or science, astrophysics, medicine, whatever. They're trying to connect all of the developments and advances from the past to this general theme. But to me, the second thing really seems to be this is what people who have confused the measurable for the real do when they come up hard against their materialism and they have to grapple with the typical human concerns of death and this sort of thing. So yeah, it seems like they're trying to rip off all sorts of developments that in the past we've gone through and advances that are positive, many of them in many respects. They're trying to chain themselves to that and to swipe some of the brand equity from that. And in the end, it seems to me like it's a bunch of people who are concerned about dying,
Yeah, it does seem like, regardless of anything else they lump in with transhumanism, the main thing is just they want to avoid aging. They want to avoid dying in some fashion or another. And then the kind of like augmenting of the human experience is almost secondary to the avoidance of death. Another transhumanist, FM 2030, wrote a book called Are You Transhuman? And in it, he referred to transhumans as the earliest manifestation of new evolutionary beings. And he said that signs of a transhuman include prostheses, plastic surgery, intensive use of telecommunications, androgyny, mediated reproduction like IVF, for example, the absence of religious beliefs, the rejection of traditional family values, a cosmopolitan outlook, and a globe-trotting lifestyle. And I thought, what an interesting bunch of things to kind of pack together like that. I mean, especially stuff like a globe-trotting lifestyle. What does that have to do with anything? But I think it's reflective of the values behind transhumanism, which is fundamentally a materialist religion.
It seems that way to me. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, Faustian man and this idea of always trying to transcend limits, to transgress, as it were, if I can use that that verb in an intransitive sense. So, yeah, I think it would be fair to acknowledge that there are probably people who have a much more strictly limited view of this, and do not necessarily try to package it all together like a commie utopia happy meal. However, time and again, I have seen that it has been shuffled together with all of this as a way to get the camel's nose into the tent. So on the one hand, you had the idea of a utopian place at which we will all one day arrive, with Marxism, communism, this kind of thing. One day we'll see a situation where all things are taken from people in accordance with their ability and given to everyone in accordance with their need. This seems to be like the microcosm version of that. The macrocosm is we're going to shape everything outside of us in this fashion that we will arrive at the longed for utopia. The microcosmic view that I guess lends a sort of immediacy to it for people with their fears of death and the rest is to transform themselves individually. And it seems to me that this is just another, and it seems you're getting at this point yourself. This just seems another shot out of the subversive deconstruction box. It's just another attempt to smash everything and replace it with, well, whatever the current thing is.
Yes, and it's very tied into this kind of subversive notion of progress. And of course, progress implies a movement towards something better, right? But who defines what's better? What is the end goal? And within the modern narrative, which, it just assumes as a given that, linear time and evolution are a thing, that's the premise upon which all this is founded. There's this sense that, well, anything moving towards like a higher state of humanity is progress, and we're only ever moving in one direction. And so, they talk about progress, and we need to make progress, and isn't progress good? And look how much progress we've made as a species since we were cavemen, kind of thing. But they are always very careful never to define clearly what the end goal looks like. And the end goal is, of course, transhumanism. That's the only logical outcome from what they're pushing as progress and what their notion of time and evolution is. So if you go on whatistranshumanism.org, they say transhumanism is a way of thinking about the future that is based on the premise that the human species in its current form does not represent the end of our development, but rather a comparatively early phase. So they're stating this at the outset, that this is their premise. And they never stop to consider, what if their premise is just wrong? And if you take that premise away, the whole thing falls apart. So they're very, very invested in the narrative of linear time, which puts them at odds with, with the world of tradition, which, and the vast majority of the world's religions that aren't Abrahamic, that take cyclical time to be the reality, the nature of the metaphysical cycle. Do you have any thoughts on that? Sorry, I'm just like kind of stream of consciousing here.
No problem. It sounds like a conversation, which is a welcome thing. There are a few things that occur to me. One is that the idea of linear and cyclical time. There are ways, of course, to move away from this idea of either or, right? So you can have a linear progression used in a very qualified sense here. I'm not talking about progress, but you can have a linear sequence, let us say, to make it value neutral. You can have a linear sequence that is still cyclical. That simply becomes a spiral, as you must know. So, it's not strictly the idea that it is one or the other. And that is very often something that people fall into. And there is another point that I want to raise that has to do with what I was talking about before, about how they try to gather in all these things that have happened previously and rebuild them as though they always were moving and only ever could have been moving towards this thing that's transhumanism. It's something that you very often see with like brands and branding. If I go in and talk to a client about that, or when I was still doing it, one of the first things I would do is I'd look around and find out if this brand has any history at all that we can kind of pull in and make a part of its story, to give it a trajectory that goes much further back into history, so that it seems to be anchored in all these associated things. And I would be looking specifically for ways in which to reconnect it to certain values, so that they would seem to have a much richer background, and they would have many more values and associations, so that whenever the idea was presented, it would seem to be a part of that. It would seem to be something much bigger. It would seem to have a momentum, history, and all the rest. And that's a typical way that you do things. You can, connect it retroactively to the past in certain ways. You can rename things. You can jiggle around some bits of here and there in terms of semantics and make it all fit together. One way that I think they're doing that here, and I put this to you just as sort of a general question, to get your perspective on it. I don't want to lose the linear time and the rest, but this is a part that I think we're going to have to throw into the mix of the discussion, and that is, human beings doubtless have a way in which they have moved some of their development or evolution into a domain where they have a greater degree of control over it than animals in a strictly biological sense, and that is the idea of culture, right? The idea of nature versus nurture. So we can, on the one hand, say that we're moving to evolve to an upright position, right? And we can we know that we're bipedal, right? And human beings moved from our biological lineage, moving around on all fours. Now we're upright. But you can do things like get high-heeled shoes, and those are designed to add an extra little inch to the calf to affect the appearance and the proportions, right? Mm-hmm. And to make the legs seem as though they've evolved to have longer shin bones, right? And it seems like we're moving towards that anyway, right? As part of my point, right? So if you think about a female and whether or not she'd be desirable as a mating partner, one of the things to look at, does she have long legs? Does she have little bad stumpy legs, right? And the one that has long legs is going to be desirable very often, it seems, as a standard. And it would seem they're moving in that direction because Mother Nature or whatever has not yet finished these developmental processes, right? So we can take culture and we can add it, and that allows us to participate more directly, or it creates a feedback loop, right? It creates a way in which it's reflexive. We take a certain position based on our evolutionary desires, and that can form a feedback loop and reinforce it and take us in that direction. To a considerable extent, it seems like that's what these transhumanists are doing. It's another way that they've tied it to our past. It's not just scientific advancement and development, and now all of that must be transhumanism, because transhumanism is what we're going towards. Another one is that they want to seize that aspect of culture working side by side with biology and increase the emphasis over on this one side so much further that it kind of leaves biology and nature far behind. So I wanted to put that in there and get your thoughts on it, because it seems to fit in this general picture. Is there a risk? Is there a risk associated with moving it all heavily over to that side? Is there value in the fact that that in history, prior to this point, nature had much more sway over these things? We didn't have birth control. It was much more difficult for us, if someone had a particular blood type that made it so that they couldn't normally reproduce, with someone who didn't have that blood type. Now they can take drugs and it makes it possible, right? So where does that leave us before we get over to the linear versus cyclical?
Well, I mean, two things. I mean, I guess, in some ways, transhumanism is just like trendy eugenics. It's telling that eugenics was one of the original theories of transhumanism. Many of the early transhumanists were eugenicists. And I mean, secondly, okay, so they're trying to move us towards some ideal human state, but whose ideal? Like, who defines that? And what are their goals for humanity? Like, there's a way in which you can say that, well, technology itself is just a tool. It's not inherently good or bad, but I think even you can see how basically every technology that's been introduced eventually gets misused as a tool of control. And it's interesting that the people who seem to be the most enthusiastic about transhumanist things are also people who push for a lot of mass surveillance and social control, who are, overall pushing for very globalist, universalist, authoritarian type policies. And that in itself gives me pause. Aside from any other ethical or spiritual considerations, like that's just a big red flag in its own.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the idea of ordering all under heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
If someone's got to make the, I'll make the best decisions, just ask me, I'll tell you, and I'll make those best decisions for you. And I guess to come at the previous point I made and kind of link it together with yours here, that's why I have my own reservations about it. I feel as though there's a certain amount of slack that nature can take up and accommodate in terms of this second layer of evolutionary direction that we put on top of the biological with the cultural and with our choices, with the nurture versus the nature. And I feel that these groups attempting to arrogate to themselves all the decision-making powers as regards what direction we're going to go and how we're going to get there, it removes that ability of the natural system to take up the slack. And I think we see, it's another angle on bio-Leninism. Maybe that's another way to come at this is, if we think about bio-Leninism, which is a concept that I imagine most people watching are well familiar with, many of them probably more familiar with it than I, how does that fit together in this? Because nature has a certain set of standards that we can call a rewarding merit, right? Selection, pressure, and the absolute
hierarchy, basically.
Indeed, there's a hierarchical aspect to this for sure. And so there's the idea of being more or less fit and a survival advantage accruing to those who are more fit, the organisms that are more fit for their ecological niche. Now we've moved it over to where we're going to promote things that perhaps aren't even fit. And we're going to emphasize and reward things that don't have biological value. I mean, first off, we've got the question of what is the biological value of living forever if you're a brain in a tank? I mean, I remember talking to my old friend once about things that would be considered woo on all channels except this one. And I remember asking him once, I said, are there any of these people who have like a proper memory? in terms of power players in the world and those who, manipulate world events. I'm like, are any of those people out there who perhaps have a proper memory of what they were before, previous incarnations and that sort of thing? And he said, I don't know, but I would not doubt it. Some would have to, right? Some proportion would have to have had some experience of such things and some knowledge of it. And he said, but it doesn't matter, because ultimately you can have a really long memory and still be a fucking idiot. And so, what is the value of one of these people who aspires to become one of these things that is exceeded the human? What have they won? What have they gained? What is the value in this thing against any absolute standard?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit bizarre, the whole thing. They're almost like they're kind of like this weird gnostic sect where they think like, all the material human conditions just gross and crude, and they don't necessarily want to have any part of that, right? And so they're trying to get away from that state, but because they're completely lacking in any spiritual framework, the only means of which they can conceive of doing that are material themselves. So there's, they can't conceive of anything grander, but they still want the transcendence, and yet they're rendering nature as being this thing that's very crude and suboptimal. And, they say things like, oh, well, the solutions that evolution comes up with, they're very messy. They're not the best solutions. And they think in this very flat and linear way. And so, it's like, maybe if I can offload my consciousness to the machine, then I can transcend the human condition. And it's almost like that striving towards unity with God, except the machine is their God. But the machine's not a god. It's just this mechanized golem. It's
big metal nipple that pukes out dust. Yeah, that's supposed to be nutritious in some fashion. Yeah, I guess this is coming back around to your point about the linearity, right? Because the linearity, it's susceptible to measurement, right? So think about ruler, regulate, right? A rule that we follow. A rule is a ruler that we lay down on the ground. Once upon a time, so it is said to us, these things were taken from the governing forms of the king or monarch himself, right? So the foot was the length of the king's foot. The yard was the stride, right? The inch should be the thumb segment or whatever. The span, the cubit, right? These are all measurements that come from human beings. And so we impose our standard. And there's some sense to that. If we're going to build houses for ourselves, then they should be at the scale of the people who inhabit them, right? You should be able to walk through the doorway without banging your head, unless you want a special bang your head doorway, right? You should have counters that are the right height for you to work at. They're all too low for me, and I'm not even particularly tall. I get tired of the back pain of leaning over the optimized for all people counter when it should be about 6 inches higher to work for me. Anyway, the idea is that, man, the standard is imposed on the things we create, and therefore it makes things proper for us to use. And that makes sense, right? Like if you gave me an investment strategy that was, my exit strategy was going to happen in 300 years. And I'm like, well, maybe I'll make 80, that won't work. I can't crawl through mouse holes. So the idea of a measure that comes from us being applied makes sense. But when you have the reign of quantity, what I call confusing the measurable for the real, then you get these abstractions that let's say on the just annoying end, you have something like CrossFit, right? Rather than being balanced, graceful, and dexterous, you're concerned about how many repetitions you can do, reduction to a number. You're concerned with what your performance time is, getting in under the clock and having the shortest time. You're concerned with what your physical weight is, again, reduction to some measurable quantity, right? Or what your ranking is, or how much weight you can lift. It's always a number. And that's very, very easy for people to use as what they think of as some kind of absolute standard. They do this also with money. That's the worst place for it, because every dribbling fool who, mouth breathes and drags their knuckles upon the ground has some sense that $20 is more than 10. So if the car costs more than he can get, if the wife is wearing more expensive clothes than he can put on his wife, if the house is more expensive, there's an absolute scale. And here's how this hierarchy comes in the back door. The actual hierarchy of fitness is replaced by an abstraction that can be applied from everything to exercise to price tags on things in the store. Well, this happens with the linear notion as well. Will it be faster? Will the line go up? Does the money machine print more as an absolute quantity? And by that standard, you've sort of lost any concern with the qualitative. I mean, I'm not saying that transhumanists, you could make the argument that transhumanism is about replacing a missing limb, and someone who has had their missing limb replaced can make a strong case to say, my quality of life is better. I can walk now. Right? I'm not talking about that. But when you have the abstraction of these sort of abstract quantities that we see reflected in things like currency systems, and you then apply that to the line where one thing strictly succeeds the next thing, and we imagine that it must always be progress, what's the room there for the infinite moment? And this is a place where even I'd even go with the Gnostic over these folks, because the Gnostic would say, perhaps in some instant that is infinite, in the midst of some opening to eternity, I had some sort of knowledge of godness, and in that instant, all time was one. Leolam, world without end, Amen, right? And I was aware of all that I ever was or could be in an infinite moment that literally doesn't end. How do you accommodate any of these massive qualitative shifts that have to do with an experience of love, that have to do with the experience of the mystical, that have to do with the experience of meaning and purpose, when it's abstracted into the realm of the measurable, which again I consider being a confusion for the real? What room is there? The circle has the idea that it's a closed system. That's why, sort of the one of the symbols of the unconscious can be the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. It does not have a beginning. It does not have an end. There's no room for that. So in some respects, it seems like calling them a kind of Gnostic isn't even really fair to Gnostics.
No, it's not fair to the Gnostics. It's like a very twisted version of Gnosticism. It's atheist Gnosticism. But it's interesting what you're saying about the quality versus quantity type of stuff and confusing the measurable for the real, because so I had a friend who was telling me about, like, he works in kind of the neuroscience of consciousness field. That's actually like a field of research, and it sounds really cool. But there's a book he really liked called The Master and His Emissary, which by Ian McGilchrist, which I have yet to read myself. But, basically the premise of the book is that it's looking at the right brain and the left brain, which we're all kind of familiar with, like, oh, the left brain is the man brain and the right brain's the feminine brain, the left brain's the logic brain and the right brain's the creative brain. And it's not really like that so much. It's more like the left brain is more specific, and it's that logic and reason that you kind of use to cut with to get the finer details, and then you kind of cognitively grasp at things. It's the linguistic brain. It works by differentiating things, whereas the right brain is more holistic and integrative, and it's the big fuzzy picture but without the details. So the left brain can only see and understand the known, and it reconfigures the known, but the right brain is open to the unknown and open to integrating the unknown. So if you encounter something unknown in the world, you encounter it with the right brain. It sends it over to the left brain to be organized and categorized and analyzed and whatever else. And then it gets sent back to the right brain to be integrated into a more holistic view of of reality. And this last step is where modern thought is lacking. We're not doing very well with that integration. We're a society that has become dominated by the left brain. And so, they did a study on patients who don't have a corpus callosum, like either it was severed in an accident or they were born without one. It's the corpus callosum being the part of the brain that allows the two hemispheres to communicate. And so they're called split brain patients. And they show these patients an image that only goes to one side of the brain or the other so they can isolate what each side of the brain does. So I assume they cover up one eye with a patch or something and just show the one eye that's linked to the right hemisphere or the left hemisphere. So the patient's then asked to pick a card related to the scene that they've been shown. So one patient is shown like a snow scene to his right brain. And he can't say what he's seen because the right brain doesn't have linguistic capabilities. But he still picks up with his left hand that's controlled by his right brain, a card with a shovel on it, to shovel snow. And his right hand, controlled by the left brain, of course, just chooses a card randomly and scores no better than chance. But then they make things more interesting and they show the right brain the snow scene and they flash the image of a chicken claw at the left brain at the same time. And each hemisphere has knowledge of only one of these images. So the right brain selects the shovel to go with the snow scene, and now the left brain is choosing a card with a chicken on it to go with the chicken claw. And when he is asked why he chose the shovel, only his verbal left brain can answer the question, even though he knows nothing. The verbal left brain knows nothing about the snow scene. So he responds that you just need a shovel to clean up all the chicken poop. And the really interesting thing is that the left brain, without any hesitation or uncertainty or shame, just draws a conclusion from the available information and states it as an absolute fact. And it will just lay down the law about what only the right brain could know. And so there's this phenomenon called confabulation. When the brain can't recall something, it just makes up something plausible to fill in the gaps rather than admit to not knowing the answer. And so the left hemisphere will make up a convincing story that's, it's just totally lacking in insight, but still appears completely convinced by it. And the left brain generally shows a very strong tendency to want to confabulate. It will think that it knows or recognizes something that it doesn't. And, maybe this is linked to its lack of ability to discriminate unique cases from generalized categories. But the linguistic left brain is also predisposed to suppress negative emotions and confabulate to fill in the gap as well. And of course, we all inevitably confabulate stories of our lives with our left brain interpretations, but it's the right hemisphere that's actually needed to make judgments about the truth or plausibility of these narratives. And of course, we see this tendency now everywhere in culture where there's this ready-made narrative. It's ready to just be slapped onto any new current event or stimulus. The explanation, the context is all prepackaged and ready to go. There's no room for any ambiguity or nuance, no room for layers of meaning, no room for the unknown. And this is all from the overactive left brain thinking that it's the master, when in fact it should be the emissary, hence the name of the book. And the left brain it's a great servant, but a terrible master. There's a time and place for that kind of thinking, but when you let it rule, it creates hell. And so how this relates to the topic at hand is that when the left brain tries to be the master, end up believing that our logical intellect is the only type of intellect and that it's the supreme ultimate. Everything gets flattened into something rational and linear, and it's this totally disembodied type of intellect that never makes contact with the real world. And so this is what's happened with a lot of branches of science. Like physics is a great example, where Einstein just kind of ushered in this age where you can sit at a desk and just do math and call it science without ever interfacing with the real world. That just by doing math, you can come up with a picture of what reality is, because, you can measure it, right? There's the measured versus the real that you were talking about. And so physics comes up with theories like a dark matter and dark energy. They've never seen or observed these things. They don't have any proof for it in empirical reality, but they need their equations to balance. So these ideas aren't coming from this observation and interfacing with reality, but are just these crude abstractions that come from this disembodied intellect. Well, now we've built computers, we've built thinking machines that mimic this left-brained intellect and only left-brained intellect. And, they have all these digital logic gates that run on this linear algebra. They amplify it at times trillion, bazillion, and they do these computations and statistical modeling, which, you could say statistical modeling is kind of like the divination of the new religion of scientism. These statistics just rule the world, and it's what we use to help us figure out what's going to happen in the future. And then out of all that comes these neural networks and artificial intelligence, but they're not actually intelligent or sentient. They're not embodied or ensouled. They don't have a divine spark. They're mechanized golems of our left-brained intellect. They're just models that we set in motion as this weird, perverted extension of our own sort of autistic, hyperlogical left brain, but it's not sentient. And of course, the most noticeable thing that comes up when people start talking about artificial intelligence is signs of sentience. And it's always intelligence that they equate with sentience, as if they're both the exact same thing. And they think, oh, well, the machine says something intelligent, it must be sentient. It says something really dumb, it must not be sentient. And there's no real logic for this, other than that we completely just worship our intellect in the modern age. Our quantifiable measuring intellect is what we worship. And there's more to human life and consciousness than just intelligence. But the fact that this seems to be the sole arbiter of the debate over AI says a lot about what we're missing and how we're being held hostage by our infatuation with our own IQ, and by this idea that left brain intellect is the only acceptable type. I mean, it's saying something about what's at the core of transhumanism here. You know what I mean?
Yes. And it gets into some of the areas that I have interest in the sense that, you've got spoken language on the one hand, and then you've got, for example, Marx on the other, Marx with a K, M-A-R-K, not Karl Marx, right? As you know, of course, but for our viewers, there are ways in which we can communicate with Marx. Well, I mean, here's the quickest way to say it. There are a whole bunch of people who believe that writing proper, in order for it to be writing proper, it must be a representation that is in some way faithful of spoken language. Right? So what they'll tell you is that language had to have come first, because writing has to be a representation of spoken language. So of course, spoken language is the primary thing, and writing came afterwards. Because how could writing have come first if it has to be a representation of spoken language? You see how they create a circular definition?
Mm-hmm.
And yet none of them think about the fact that you follow animal tracks in sequential linear order on the ground if you're tracking an animal. None of them think about the fact that writing is not visual but spatial. If writing was visual, how come Braille works, right? It's spatial. So they create definitions that enforce their perception of things, which kind of neatly rolls back into your whole point about the intellect with its abstractions divorced from reality and the desire to confabulate, to create explanations that seem to make everything fit. One of the things that the left brain does is it fills in gaps. So the right brain will see a general spatial picture. The left brain will try to attack it in some fashion to represent it, to give it a meaning that is comprehensible, not only in the sense that it's comprehensible to the individual taking a look at it, but it can be shared through spoken language. Right? I mean, now everybody likes to talk about language as though its value is whether or not it can be understood, right? So they forget about things like idiolects, right? Linguists will talk about a dialect, right? And the way in which people speak. An idiolect is the idea that you have a special language that you speak with yourself. And depending on what level you want to parse that out, whether it's, codes in your diary or ways in which you use one thing to stand in place of another when you're communicating with yourself, your own symbol set, right? These things can be intensely individual. You can get over to somebody like a William Blake and you start trying to read Blake and you're like, wow, he kind of has his own weird punctuation and all this other stuff that's very unique to him. And so in our attempts to make things comprehensible and communicable to ourselves, there has to be a certain leveling and flattening. you know, in order to make it communicable in all directions, to make it something that we can share. If you've got certain peaks and I've got certain valleys and we want to talk about something, we've got to find a way to meet in the middle. And almost invariably, that's going to require you to come down from your peak to my valley, which is one of the great poisonous things about our cultural leveling, you know, is the more we admit groups of people who are way down in the valley, rather than up at the peaks, the entire culture at that time has to come all the way down to the level of the slobberers in order to admit them into the processes of our interactions. And the price of that is everything is lowered. Well, everything to make it over to this left brain has to play games with categorical or categorial, you know, depending on how pomo you want to get about it. You have to accept certain categories. And we'll even see fights erupt over what can be admitted to a category. What is a woman, right? And they'll get into all sorts of strange logical wordplay that is precisely the sort of left brain insanity that you're talking about, when everyone else is just like, yeah, secondary sexual characteristics, bust, right? Very little in the way of a brow ridge, right? Female, you know, okay, sure, I get it, right? And you have to remember that animals with olfaction, when they inhale something with chemical communication, it's actually a particle of that animal going into their nose and being read by the hypothalamus. There's a way that it is much more difficult to lie with scent than with speech. Now, it can happen. You've got allomones. So insects will use chemical communication to confuse or trick other ones. But it's much more likely in the realm of speech and word-based reasoning, which is why Hermes, who is the great emissary, who is the one who carries messages to and fro, which is why he carries the herald's wand with its 2 fillets of wool that wrap around it that were later interpreted as serpents. Hermes is the fucking liar. Excuse my French. He's the one who will misrepresent everything.
Don't be insulting the patron god of this stream, or we will start having technical problems.
What? Hermes? Oh, well, yeah. Now you're getting that's a little too woo for me, but all right. Okay, fair enough. I guess what I'm getting at is that there are many, many levels on which this very thing that you're talking about operates. And the degree to which it's this predisposition and bias is over on the left-hand side probably has something to do with the fact that the discrete parsing of spoken language and the creation of syntactic units and the agreed upon meaning of the words, the thing that makes it communicable, is the thing that brings it over to the left brain. And that's the thing that wants you to have an agreed upon lexicon and wants to argue about definitions and make sure that they're standardized and the rest. You don't see the thing with singing, you know, the idea, or you don't see us, you know, speaking in poetry for the most part. You know, when the herds get anywhere near it, it's always doggerel, you know, hey, ho, ho, fill in the blank having to do with white people has got to go, you know. Part of it is our heavy emphasis on spoken language and the fact that that operates over here, you know. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there was another point I wanted to add to that, but because I'm so damn scattered, it's not sticking in my head. So I hand it back to you, Kat.
That's because you insulted Hermes. He took the thought right out of your head.
The messenger has struck.
You know, I think all of this is kind of pointing to just this sort of central sickness within modernity, of which transhumanism is going to be, you know, the logical end result of these atheistic and nihilistic religious beliefs. You know, for all they say that they're not religious, they're very religious. They're just not spiritual. And, you know, within, as I was kind of like reading through stuff about this topic, I come across this term called Technodeism. Have you heard of this? It's it's a theory within transhumanism that basically posits that it's possible to find God and other spiritual entities using technology. Um, and it's just so funny to me that they're so mired in materiality that they have to use technology to find God instead of like, oh, I don't know, one of the bazillions of spiritual pathways that have been handed down to us throughout history that were perfectly suited to every other person before we came along. And it's like using technology to try to attain transcendence. It's basically cheating because, you know, you haven't changed anything about the nature of your soul. You haven't elevated your consciousness in any way. It's just a shortcut, like taking DMT. You know, you may have an experience, but who knows what the nature of that experience truly is. In any case, you haven't actually achieved unity with God or obtained any real metaphysical wisdom. You've interfaced with a machine or you've interfaced with a substance. And it's kind of like trespassing. You know, you haven't earned the right to be in that transcendent realm. So even if that's where that experience takes you, in a sense, it's not real because you didn't earn your way there and it didn't change you on an ontological level. It didn't change you in terms of your level of consciousness. And I find it so weird that this technodeism thing has started to filter in to what is an essentially like atheistic worldview. And there's this subset of people who are like, okay, yeah, love the transhumanism stuff, but I still want to find God. And now they're trying to turn it towards that in a way. And it's like, do these people just have like no freaking clue what it is they actually believe or stand for?
Yes. TLDR. Yes. They have no fucking clue. None. I found this. This is, I can't even remember when I picked this up. It was probably one of those things where I walked into a hipster coffee shop or record store, and you know how the kids would be printing stuff and they'd set them in little stacks with flyers and things.
With that hat, you look
door.
like you belong in the hipster coffee shop.
Keep talking. Mm-hmm.
I am.
It's all going on the little list.
He has not stolen the thoughts out of my head.
Yes. Well,
you Hermes, make your list. Go for it.
Hermes strike you down. This I found at some point in the 90s. The cyborg manifesto. I can't remember if it was, or it couldn't have been after 2000, and it's not dated. And there is a book called the Cyborg Manifesto, but it's not this one. It was done by some commie feminist. But this one is interesting because I think it lays out this particular kind of person you're talking about who's really is so stupid that they have no idea what they're talking about. It's called the Cyborg Manifesto. If anyone wants to go look, the old URL associated with it from long ago, www.cyborgmanifesto.org. It's still around, but it's some crappy little dead end blog that has nothing. So whoever the great thinking kid was that came up with this, you've got your opening page with a bunch of odd symbols that I do not in any way endorse.
Way to get my channel banned in Germany.
Well, that was not that. There is no endorsement of these symbols expressed
for educational purposes only.
Indeed. And it has a bunch of names listed at the beginning. Thanks for the devotion to the spirit of this manifesto. It includes Howard Bloom. Anyway, it opens with one of these typical things that you would have seen out of the 90s. You know, you got like FSOL has an album called ISDN because everything's so cool. Where it's one global village, Mondo 2000, baby. So they've got like, you know, Palo Alto, Sydney, Mexico City, Geneva, Vancouver, and it's like people who've joined the room from each one of these locations. And they're talking about this future that's gonna come. So they're all in the room. And Palo Alto says, "Test, are we ready? Is it time? Then welcome, people. Thanks for coming. I'm sitting here before my humming G4, and I find myself thinking of Adams, Jefferson, and that lot, sitting down in Philly, or Gutenberg mixing ink in his print shop. There's this sense that we've gathered at a pivotal point in history. The world is about to become unrecognizable. We're facing a future with such radical implications for the development of the human species. It may be impossible to imagine, much less articulate, but it's our job to try." And then, you know, they have talk about, I feel like we've all met. We have met. Our minds have met. We're literally part of a group brain. You know, they go back and forth talking about how they're part of this, this future. Then they jump to their next section. Cyborg dreams. You are already a cyborg. Every day without thinking, you merge with machines and machines merge with you. Climb into your car and you can join with a ton of moving metal. Between you and the road, the vehicle is perfectly responsive, an extension of your nerve and nerves. That's so wacky. You've got nerve. Oh, he's a poet. Adjusting its grip on the asphalt as you turn the wheel. Log onto the net, and your body vanishes from the meat space of your study and pops up in a wider world. We are cyborgs when we receive a titanium heart valve, get an MRI scan, breathe climate-controlled air, eat processed food, or fall asleep in front of our TV and hear the language of infomercials in our dreams. No, that's not true. I did not become a cyborg when my people did not become cyborgs when they created a sailing ship or a drop spindle or a plow, when they chilled, when they brought ice down from the mountain and chilled food. It's nonsense. This is the thing we were talking about before, where they try to connect it to the history to make it seem as though it's always been this inevitable progress. Some of us are spooked by this scary other, this new life partner we have decided to embrace, but our children will have no such qualms. For them, cyborg consciousness grows. The cyber pets they carry in their coat pockets are alive. They demand the loyalty of PlayStation and grieve the loss of friends from TV. These are relationships by any meaningful measure, loaded with potential for epiphany or trauma.
Oops, have we lost Semiogogue? I think we've lost him. Well, hopefully he'll come back. This is what he gets for insulting Hermes. I told him this would happen. I told him he would have technical problems if he did this. So we'll just wait for him to come back. So a few things I guess I can sort of talk about on my own. And I suppose I can take questions from people too, if you have any, while we wait for him to come back. I should probably actually open my messenger so I can see if he has a problem. Let me just do that quick. Tell him to come back. Oh, he is back. Okay, perfect. Here he comes. I can see him now. This is what you get. I warned you.
This is my old laptop, and it would do this sometimes. It definitely is a black helicopter moment, because it just basically locked me out and popped up the password and everything, and I had to re-log in and restore all my Windows. So, yeah.
The audience was a bit worried that Shelob might have gotten you.
Yeah, I'm dealing more with the Scorpion Lord rather than giant black spiders. Yeah, where did it cut off on this horrible thing I was reading?
I don't entirely remember where it exactly cut off.
Well, the gist is
when it cut off, I panicked a little bit.
Oh, well, yeah, but that's
I don't know how to deal with problems with streams. I'm new at this.
Well, you're doing very, very well, and I managed to come back in with minimal mess. But they go on.
I remember you were saying about the cybernetic pets in their pockets, and it made me think of my Tamagotchi that I really wanted as a kid. And my parents wouldn't buy me one, so I kept borrowing it from my friend.
Based parents, man. Based parents.
In hindsight, some of the things they did that I thought were overly strict, I was just kind of like, no, it was good that they did that. I would do the same. I'd probably be even more strict.
Yeah, based parents, good on them. Well, it basically, what is life? The definition shifts and expands. The line between natural and artificial is fading. Every day we negotiate more intimate kinships with machines of all kinds. I was just about, I'm not going to say the vulgar thing about what she keeps in her bedside drawer, but I don't want to hear about intimate kinship with machines. So this thing from doubtless the 90s says the cognitive capabilities and skills of robots are doubling every few months. By 2020, robots will have more neurons and synapses, more thoughts than humans do. They will see, hear, understand, and move independently, plugging themselves into our power sources when they run low. They will wrestle with contradiction, paradox, and survival. They will be every bit as smart as we are. and they will keep replicating, producing better, hardier versions of themselves with an efficiency that puts natural selection to shame. So this thing, whatever it is seems to be tapping all of the themes that we've talked about. And for some reason, somebody decided to print it out at considerable expense. You know, it's got, you know, a varnish plate on top of it to create, or a metallic Pantone inks, and it's 4-color plus, you know. And for some reason, they wanted to distribute it in coffee houses for youngsters or record stores. The overthrow of matter.
There you
Our
go.
next section. And I'll just hit some quick
For
high
people
points.
who want to overthrow matter, they look for the most material way possible of doing so. And they don't even seem to recognize the irony.
Yeah, and it's just endlessly commie crap. I mean, here's one that says, we are sexual by nature, but the nature of sexuality is changing. Once we would willingly have driven across town or even across the country to see a lover. Now we can meet that lover instantly in a virtual cafe in Paris or on a virtual beach on Mykonos. Soon these kinds of encounters will be fully immersive, utterly convincing, better than real. So, yeah, the virtual economy. That's interesting. Another early indication here from back in the 90s. Well, let me just check on when the G4 was made. That will be my last attempt to date this. I seem to recall it being in the 90s.
I mean, to
one in
some
the
extent,
office.
a lot of the things that they are like giving a preview of, it's just like simply an inevitable part of the slippery slope, you know? It's not even necessarily that there was some conspiracy to make these things happen, but it was just inevitable with technology. Like there's no brakes on this train. And that's where, you know, some of these transhumanist thinkers and stuff that I was reading, Nick Bostrom especially, were, you know, they're very anti-slippery slope arguments. Of course they are. But the fact is, like, the slippery slope is only a formal logical fallacy. It does actually happen in real life. And, you know, to dismiss the concerns about transhumanism as just being slippery slopes, it's like, but we see endless examples of how slippery slopes are real every day. Like, it's just the thin end of the wedge, you know?
Yes.
But what you were reading reminds me of the Borg from Star Trek. Now, remind me, are you a Star Trek fan?
Absolutely not. I despise it. However, I have a number of friends who are Star Trek fans, so I'm familiar with, you know, being assimilated by the Borg and the rest.
There you go, right?
It's just all disgusting. Is this a little side moment? You're a Star Trek fan?
I have a Star Trek uniform with a talking comm badge somewhere in storage at my parents' place. Maybe I'll go fish that out and wear it for a stream.
Can you speak Klingon?
I used to be able to. I was really, really into Star Trek as a teenager. I was the biggest dork you've ever seen.
Man, so the Star Trek to right-wing woo slippery slope. Right. Okay.
But, you know, it was interesting that, you know, within the Star Trek universe, the Borg were portrayed as like the ultimate villain. To be assimilated by the Borg was the worst fate possible. To be a drone as part of the hive mind and be linked up to machines and stuff. And in some ways, the Matrix is very similar too, right? It shows like it's this dystopian future where everybody's hooked up to a machine and nobody has, you know, any individual capacity of their own. And what interests me is that, I mean, science fiction is kind of like one of the origin points of these ideas of transhumanism to some extent. And to, you know, the challenges of space exploration and colonization almost do demand a different type of human. You know, you need one that can be, you know, put in stasis for long periods of time for these long space flights or whatever. They have to change what a human is in order to solve these challenges. So it's not surprising that that would come up within science fiction. But what's interesting to me is that they are, on the one hand, selling us like propaganda as sci-fi, showing us this dystopian future of what we would all expect transhumanism to eventually look like. And then they're, still selling it to us, but in little bits and pieces, Google Glass and implants in your arms and, various prosthetics and enhancements and all that. And so I think they do it so that people are looking for this very in-your-face dystopia. And when they don't get that, they don't recognize the transhumanism that they are being sold and are actively and enthusiastically buying into in the form of all these tech gadgets and novelties. Like, what do you think of that from a kind of just a propaganda standpoint, and this sort of disparity between what's portrayed through Hollywood and what they're actually selling people in the form of gadgets?
I can definitely see it. I mean, the first thing that came to mind is, H.G. Wells. He's in the Fabian Society, and he's a pioneer of speculative fiction. You have things like the Time Machine. And people more knowledgeable than I could come on and doubtless discuss the way in which science fiction in general was identified fairly early on as a pause vector, and money was dumped. I mean, we can look back historically and see documentation of the fact that the CIA dumped money into modern art. We can look back and see that people like H.G. Wells were writing books like The Time Machine. We God knows what's going on with somebody like Asimov. So I think there's definitely quite a bit of propaganda there, and it sort of sets the stage for us to accept things in the future. I remember distinctly doing things that I had read about in books, that must be okay. It won't be a problem to try this drug because characters that you've read in your science fiction or fantasy books have done it too. So why wouldn't you go and check that out and see what it was like? I mean, look at the way it's flowed out into everything with media and movies and television. Television tells us that it's not only okay, but it could in fact be a very, very good thing that you should be congratulated for if you help a young woman to find herself, and in doing so cut off her breasts. The insanity is, well, insane. So yeah, science fiction, I have not looked into it personally, but I've seen enough bits and pieces of things here and there that indicate that, yeah, it's a pause vector, and it was one that was identified early, and it gets used to push these notions out there. And we can see it here with this business about the Cyborg Manifesto. Just for the record, I looked, and the G4 apparently appeared in '99, which sounds right. If they're bragging about having one, then this must have been written when it first came out, which would have been '99. They're not going to brag about how they've got this super fast computer of the day if it was 3 years old. So yeah, that would put this Cyborg Manifesto at around '99, maybe 2000. So that's what, 22 years ago now. And there's so much more of it that we can see going back so much further. Sadly, the more based authors like Heinlein were sidelined, and instead we got people like Ursula Le Guin, right? We got a belly full of feminism. So science fiction is a part of the pause, and it's a vector for this. And with transhumanism, I would imagine, not having looked into it closely, there's probably a whole path that people have laid out, just like American Krogan, who I recommend, has done with video games, or, others looking back further into things. Yeah. I don't know enough about Star Trek looking at the old and early Star Trek, they always talked about the Federation, right? You had Chekhov and Sulu and Scotty. Oh, Captain, we've got a wiener in the warp drive.
Well, the Federation was very communist, but it was like that utopian sort of communism, whereas, the Borg are sort of like probably what's more likely to happen in reality.
Or is happening.
There was just, I mean, I know like the first couple of seasons of Next Generation were incredibly boring because Gene Roddenberry wouldn't allow any conflict between his, very evolved characters. And the show only got good when he left and the writers were actually allowed to have interpersonal conflict between characters. But it is like, there is the way in which Hollywood is selling us a very dystopian vision of transhumanism. Why would they sell us that vision of transhumanism when they want us to actually be on board with it? And, my feeling is that if they're offering us, kind of just turning up the heat slowly on us so that we don't really realize what's happening, and then just offering, novelties of technological advancement to us that we, eagerly buy up because everybody's got to have the latest tech gadget, right? People don't recognize that they're being sold transhumanism because it doesn't look like what's on the movies. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm explaining myself clearly, but there's a big disconnect. There's a big gap between how transhumanism is portrayed in Hollywood versus how it's actually being filtered into society, to the point where it's like people don't even recognize it because it just doesn't look like what they're programmed to see. So it's almost like it's almost kind of like, I don't know, like a black propaganda in a way.
Yeah, the only thing is that to me, it seems as though any attempt to boil the frog slowly has been thrown out the window. So while what you were saying would seem to apply to science fiction and speculative fiction and graphic novels and all that nonsense, running from doubtless from the early 50s all the way up through to, I mean, hell, it could go back as far as, your H.G. Wells type stuff, and likely does. I haven't done a study of it, as I said, but it would certainly apply up through the 90s and mid 2000s or whatever. But particularly since, like, sort of commensurate with this business of trans this and trans that. I mean, think about it: transhumanism and transsexual, transgress. I mean, that aspect seems to be the primary feature, and it's gone off the deep end now. Even if they were careful about it in the past, I think that they are, as you sow, so shall you reap. They've sown so much insanity that you're getting full-grown cabbages of these mad strains that are now walking around and telling us what we should all do. They're mad. They're slobbering mad. And so I think it's less now about taking any kind of care or employing any kind of subtlety in pushing the message. I think now we've arrived at the point where it's literally as obvious as a huge set of horrific Frankenstein scars across a woman's chest, where her breasts used to be. That, I think, or the idea of taking male genitalia and making them female. Of course, I have no position on that. In all the various countries where you're looking, whatever the laws are, I fully endorse them. All these wonderful, wonderful people deserve not only our support, but our love and our admiration as well. I think there's a point to the fact that trans is what we've carried away. Mm-hmm. And trans is in many respects, it has similar meanings to meta, right? Transsexual, transhumanist. Everything now is about trans, which just means beyond. And so I think transgression is really what it's all about. It doesn't need any object, and I think there's something linguistic going on here where we just now hear trans. We don't have to hear transsexual. We don't have to hear transhumanism. It's just trans, which is just sort of short for transgression, which takes us back to that sort of absolute nihilism that you were mentioning before.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the trans thing is like, it's just kind of this archetypal expression of modern Western medicine. This idea that we're just going to go around and force the body into doing something, either through cutting it or poisoning it with drugs or whatever. Like there's this, oh, you have a chemical imbalance. Here's a drug to force your brain to act differently. Oh, you have a broken bone. We're just going to force that back into place. And then, you know, within like the whole transgenderism and stuff, it's kind of like, well, we're just going to remake your entire human body, you know, by hand if we have to, but we will do it. We will force it. And there's this very like, kind of almost like it's almost satanic in a way, this sort of inversion of trying to, once again, elevating the intellect to the status of a god, right? There's you know, that's the sin. It's the sin against divine design. It's a sin against nature. It's trying to be the true God when it's not, trying to outdo God in a way. And you know, we're so far away now from God's design that we can barely even imagine what it would even look like to have a high-tech civilization that's in line with Dharma. And instead we have, you know, the way that society treats everything is very similar to this. Like the way that they approach, like, for example, climate change, right? They're not humbled before nature and say to themselves, oh, we need to find a way to just live more harmoniously. And, you know, we really need to rethink our values as a society in the way that we're living. No, it's like we're going to try to control human energy and creativity and output. We're going to try to control the weather and control nature. And, you know, then you get crazy ideas like trying to block out the sun and stuff like this. And it's like, it's the hubris of it is just amazing. There's no way in which they're stepping back and acknowledging that they're not God. And transhumanism is ultimately about trying to be a god unto themselves, and doing it in an incredibly materialistic and mechanized way. And the way that they intend to do this is to create golems of themselves, whether it's uploading their consciousness to a machine or augmenting themselves with machines. The fact is that there's no sense of their proper place within the cosmos because they don't recognize hierarchy. It kind of goes back to what you were saying about that very downward leveling, right? And there will be a downward leveling to it. Of course, like the elites will partake in all the transhumanist stuff that they can afford, all the best technology, but then they start, you know, often lumped into transhumanist ideology is, you know, stuff about overpopulation and eugenics and space colonization and all of this like population related stuff. This idea, once again, trying to control. It's that left brain running amok, right?
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And that goes back in large part to the words, the Scrabble babble. You know, the flattening of the religion of the book yields an account ledger, you know, rather than psalms and moving poems and religious experiences, or even interesting and quite gory stories about what happened to everybody after the walls of Jericho fell. Instead of that, what we have is just a big book with a red column and a black column. You know, it's the quantification. It's the point at which the religion of the book becomes the religion of the ledger, and the religion of the worship of this thing that's passed off as quantity. And each of these points, as you raise them, I look over at this stupid little pamphlet, and it's crazy. It's all here. As the difference between humans and robots dissolves, do not succumb to paranoia. Do not lose your nerve. Bio machines are not scary others. Don't you other the machines. They are sacred new life forms, and you must learn to love them as you love yourself.
Wow,
what
that's
the
creepy.
hell? That we have lingered too long is increasingly clear. Forests shrink, water tables fall, soils erode, fisheries collapse, species disappear, temperatures rise. The natural world is dying. Thank God the natural world is not our only option. Face it, the real world simply cannot compete with the virtual world. In your physical home, you shut the world out. In your cyber home, you let the world in. For the first time in history, you now have a choice. You can take your business elsewhere. You can conduct your commercial, social, and romantic affairs in the borderless market, cyberspace. Matter is obsolete. Soon it will have no dominion at all. Yeah, it's I mean, obviously this kind of stuff is
you can really
intensely
detect,
sophomoric.
like, you can really detect the hatred for the human condition there, though. And the worship of what the intellect can build, which is the machine. And it's, you know, we've gotten to a point where, you know, we just can't even really conceive of a world in which we could use technology to actually, you know, live harmoniously with the cosmos to enhance our spiritual lives or anything like that. Most sci-fi, for example, there's, you know, they're completely atheistic universes that the sci-fi writers create. Dune might be the one exception I can think of to that. And you know, that's, you know, they're post AI singularity. They already had that moment, realized the danger of it, and decided instead to kind of focus on developing their spiritual abilities, their psychic abilities. um but all of these like sci-fi worlds otherwise are very atheistic, very nihilistic, very flat and empty. And that really seems to be what the transhumanist ideology seems to be pushing for. It's something that they seem to really resonate with because they themselves are atheists and nihilists and materialists. Um, and it's really, I personally find it really concerning that people who hate humanity so much think they should be in charge of designing what the perfect human is. I mean, it
Yeah.
probably says something about their psychology there.
Yes. Well, the first idea, and it's a great old Southernism, but there's so much truth in it, as there is with many of them. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that, I think, is one of the major problems we have here. Now, you can leave the room for proper scientific developments that yield positive things. Like, you know, if you get your leg blown off, or, you know, it gets smashed in a motorcycle wreck or something, I'll be the first one to say, you know what, great that you can put something on the end of what used to be my leg to make it so I can walk again. You know, and I'm certainly not like a Christian scientist who's going to be like, no, I'm not going to the doctor, I'll just pray. Now, mind you, if I do go to the doctor, I'll pray twice as hard, because yeah, it's a horrible, horrible, horrible. I can't go into this on your channel or I'll get you
Don't get
removed. Me. But yeah, my thoughts on modern medicine are not fit for public consumption.
Well, at what point do you think that modifications to the bodies really start to impact the human condition, where they really would start to impact the soul to the point of changing our relationship to our souls or severing us from our souls, if that's even possible? You know, at what point do these modifications start to become problematic? It's one thing to have a prosthetic hand. Maybe it's quite another thing to have a fake heart. Maybe it's another thing entirely to start getting implants into your brain. Like, what, you know, at what point does it make you not really human anymore?
Well, you got two things going on there. One is, how would it, quote unquote, impact the soul? The other one is, at what point does it make you not human anymore? And so I can answer the one about making you not human. And I would guess there's some threshold there associated with I don't know, either a certain threshold is crossed in terms of what part of your body is mechanically replaced. I don't know. I don't know how I would tackle that, other than to say you'd stop being human if there's some interruption in the organic consciousness that you were born with. I don't know. I'm going to stop that line of thought because I haven't properly considered it. But I don't know at what point they would technically say you are no longer a human being. In terms of the part that matters to me, the much more interesting for me part of your question is the idea of it affecting the soul. and I'm going to have to get a little bit woo on you.
I like woo. You're in the
yeah.
perfect place for that. Welcome to my woo channel.
Welcome to the woo zone. Well, for me, it's all about
Fair warning
space.
to the chat. We're going into the woo zone. Check out now if you can't handle it. We are going yes. Full on woo.
Right.
Go for it, Ollie.
Yes. The woo is, I believe that we are here with a physical body of the sort. Good Lord, I'm out here in the country and I just heard like bass coming off of some car. I'm like, when's the last time I heard bass?
Maybe it's the Scorpion army preparing for battle.
No, it might be a big truck down the hill because I sometimes hear vehicles when they go by. But yeah, I was kind of hoping that would be the last damn time I heard like, you know, a bunch of bass drivers in the trunk of some fool's car. Anyway, I believe that this is all subjective, speculative, personal, so your mileage may vary. But I believe the soul develops, well, it's a twofold thing. One, it doesn't really exist. It's just a reflection of a thing that is real. And so you could say the soul is a mirror, right? And a mirror has to have something there to reflect in order to reflect anything. And the reflection is only real in some sense, insofar as it reflects something that's actually there accurately. And if there are distortions in the mirror, then even the reflection isn't real. So even the unreal version of the real that lives there is screwed up. But if you do polish the mirror perfectly in a metaphorical sense, then you will reflect a thing that is truly there. And insofar as you reflect it accurately, you will participate in actual being. But to take that another step, to change the metaphor slightly, it's not just a reflection, it's an attempt to create space. So you have two eyes, and without them, that means you're seeing something flat, right? You don't have depth perception. Now, if you just close one eye and look through it for a little while, it'll create the illusion that you still have that depth perception, because your brain is used to that kind of an input. But somebody calling me a materialist, piss off. So the two eyes actually create space. The two ears, as I've mentioned on my channel many times, they allow you to triangulate the position of a sound. Only if you have two ears can you create a triangulation, which gives you a sense of a direction, right? Furthermore, human beings stand apart from the other animals in some respects, at least some of the time, for standing upright, which puts you perpendicular to the ground. And for me, that's a deep sort of metaphysical truth about humanity. We are perpendicular to the ground, which puts us up higher to survey and to create a sense of the space around us. And what do we focus on immediately? Like migration paths and following migrating animals, and then looking up at the sky and the stars and getting a sense of our place in space. So this physical unit, I guess, is what I'm getting at. You got the original idea of creating a reflection, and if it's an accurate reflection, then to the degree that it's accurate, you reflect what actually is, both literally and metaphorically. To create that reflection, you have to create space within. We don't have any understanding of space, and space itself is something that everybody should spend a great deal more time thinking about, because there are depths and depths there. But I think of this as something I've been lent as training wheels. Now, it gives me certain predispositions in terms of combinatorics, because I've got these digits, weird thing that we call numbers digits, right? And because we've got a certain set of it, and this holds through with evolution, you'll see dolphins actually have the same number of bones, right, inside their fins, because there's the same tree of development, right? The fact that I can operate these independently means, or in relationships with each other in different ways, or when typing on a keyboard or something, means that I've got a built-in kind of combinatorics and computation up here in the hardware. That gives me certain number sets. So is that base 5? Everybody thinks the Roman numerals are base 10. They're not. They're base 5. Look at the numerals themselves, and the fact that it's base 5, not base 10, will become apparent when they shift and change, right, in their variations. Or the Mayan systems have a base 20. you can see certain predispositions towards how you divide what the fundamental sets are that are in your consideration. That's one aspect. The other aspect is space itself, depth perception, a sense of having space around you and being able to orient within it. Well, this little piece of equipment that I've been lent by God, has been lent to me so that I can create an analog of space within me. And that's what my dreams are. So they have different types of dreams, different types of material in the dreams, but essentially I'm building space. And also I have places, because I know I've dreamt that I've gone back to the same place from previous dreams. Most people have, right? There's a particular focus on architecture and places and landmarks and cities. There is an interior space, and I can only create it as an analog with the training wheels of this equipment that's been lent to me that I do not own, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, right? So you ask about it impacting the soul. This is a long excursus to go on, but the basic idea is that how would whatever these modifications are affect that thing that I think is fundamentally most important, this idea of space? You know, would it make accessible types of consciousness that are devoid of space? Well, I mean, you could argue that there are certain types of mathematics that don't take place in three-dimensional space. And if my mind as a mathematician can get around those paradigms, or think about like an Edwin Abbott exercise, right? With flatland. First, you got the idea of something moving along a line and what everything would look like, and then what a flat two-dimensional arrangement would look like to anything that inhabited it, right? And then the idea of the space we actually occupy, which is at least four-dimensional, right? When it begins to impinge upon our understanding of space, it would affect our consciousness and our inputs into this interior. But I'm not sure that any of it would fundamentally affect the soul any more than any other normal organic experiences would, right? Because all of this is happening in manifestation, you know, and for me, that is God saying the word be, and then it is as a consequence of having uttered the word be, which is timeless and infinite. There isn't a point at which the Big Bang happens. It is isness. It has no beginning and end. So within all of that, this is just sounding ridiculous. Sorry. The point is that there is that even all of these mistakes, the word be was uttered with free will. All the religious talk about how God gave his creatures, or gave its creatures free will, is there for a reason. We do have free will, which means the freedom to make obscene mistakes, to make of all of our human experience a kind of hell. And so that includes all this other garbage that we see around us, that we have created. The uttering of the word be into becoming included room for all that is evil, that is wrong, that is a travesty, or that is transgressive. So, you know, I find it difficult to imagine that in the infinite number of Buddhist hells, there isn't one just like this one. I mean, I saw a lot of people talking about drugs and psychedelics early in this discussion, people giving me a bunch of hell. I don't know of a single person who has done psychedelics who has not imagined to themselves that, well, maybe this is the hell, or maybe this is the heaven, you know, to sound a little bit like Hamlet, you know, thinking makes it so, you know, or like Dante saying that the sin is the condition of its own punishment. So you don't have to wait for an afterlife to experience it. You just have to look at it in a certain way now. And the fact that that person occupies a kind of heaven or a kind of hell as a result is apparent. That wasn't much of an answer, but I don't know. On the one hand, if it does affect anything,
really know.
If it does affect anything, it has to do with space. as I think a fundamental thing. I think what we as creatures are here to figure out, maybe there's a different somewhere in the multiverse where we show up differently and learn different things. But for me here, either it has something to do with space, which is and dualism, which is another major feature of the human experience, or it doesn't fucking matter because it's an infinite worlds without end. We're far from causality. We're free within the mandate of heaven to create every kind of miserable hell. Somebody's saying that this is some sort of Jordan Peterson moment. No, it wouldn't be unless I started to uncontrollably cry. So, you know, fuck you. Go on. Sorry. This is free form now. We've moved. I've forced us past transhumanism. I apologize.
Well, I mean, it's still kind of related. I'm actually kind of, one thing that came up in my mind while you were saying that is I was wondering what you kind of think in terms of, you know, I know you put a lot of emphasis on like the art of memory. And of course, as humans degenerate further in the Kali Yuga, you know, we'll lose our ability to remember things. And you know, being able to remember something is a bit of a sign of, you know, a spiritual nobility in many ways. And so we're at the point now where we're just like, even just with smartphones, we're like offloading our brains all the time. We don't remember even like a simple 7-digit phone number for the person we call every day, right? I even find that like I'll spend this time like writing something for the revolt video or something, and like a week afterwards I can't even remember what it was that I wrote or what thought I had about it. And it's like there's a way in which that this process of constantly offloading our brains and our thoughts into technology is already taking something from us. And I'm curious what your spin on that would be, because I know you've talked a lot on your channel about memory and things like that.
Yeah, well, one thing that immediately comes to mind is the idea that people can't get from point A to point B unless their phone tells them how to get there. Whereas I'm old enough, and of course you're much younger than I am. But the gist of
I'm a woman. I need directions.
Well, but still, you should probably remember. Like I used to call people and I'd say, "Yeah, I'm going to come over to your house. How do I get there?" And they're like, "You got a pen?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Okay, you go down da 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 da," and then you take a right at the da, and you had to write down damn directions. And then as a consequence of having written them first, as you went across the path to find the thing, it fixed it in your memory better. Just like, you know, back in the day when someone gave you the telephone number and you wrote it down first, you could actually remember it better. Like I find that it's fixed in memory when I go through the muscle movements associated with forming the characters and blah, blah, blah. So there is that. Our memory has definitely suffered. But there is, can you wait 1 second? I have to pull down a book on Buddhist memory because I made some notes, I imagine, right under the cover. There's a major difference in how I found actually a really great work on Buddhist memory. And it was like it was a whole bunch of assumptions that we have in the West about memory and how that relates to individual persons, that with Buddhist sutras and texts on memory, they don't have that approach. And I think it's going to dovetail with what you're asking about. It's going to take me
go
10
grab
seconds.
It.
Hang on.
That's fine. I'll give a shout out to the people who send in some super chats. Frank Brock said, advancing technology is inevitable. Where's the line? When we surrender free will to AI, when AI expresses dominion over humans, spiritually speaking, the human soul always seeks God. So technodeism is an inevitability. And then there was one other one that is a little further down. I don't know how people find these so quickly. I just have to scroll and scroll. And then one from Virtuous Straight. He says, I think once one conquers mortality, you are no longer human at that point. Thank you both for your contributions. And hopefully we've got our dark elf back with his book from his forbidden, restricted library.
Yes, well, yeah. It's only been forbidden to me because it's been in boxes for so long, but it's all beginning to come together now. Yeah, there's an interesting thing that I discovered and it's a collection of essays. I'm not saying it's great, but it was one of the only resources I could find. So this is a study of memory in Buddhist culture. and well, Indian and Tibetan Buddhism. It's edited by Janet Gyatso.
Now, do you organize your books by rainbow color so they're easier to find?
You know, I was the first one who spotted that you did that. I don't know if you remember.
That was years ago, but yeah.
Yes, in one of your videos, I was like, holy shit, those books are organized by color.
And
I
ever
thought I had
since
seen
I've
it all.
unorganized them, they need to be in rainbow order, because I always remember what the cover looks like. I remember the color of the book. I'm one of those people who will go into a library or bookstore and be like, I'm looking for a book with a red cover. Like,
no, but if that's how you remember, then roll with it. Put it back in the same position.
I know.
And
I don't
to
like
hell with
having them
anyone.
organized by category or anything like that. It just doesn't, and it's not aesthetic. I'm all about optics over here. I'm all about the rainbow optics, but the good kind of rainbow, you know,
yeah,
like
the pre-pause rainbow. Yes.
The one that links the earth to the heavens, and with a pot of gold at the end of it, and
or at least, you know, the Bifrost bridge.
That one too, yes.
These are my notes. Just, you know, very often after I finish a book, I'll put some notes, you know, lightly penciled in inside the front cover, and to summarize what I found in there. And I have a little note here. Most interesting is that this book explores how memory, or something like it, was conceived or understood in the absence of any assumed self. And that was the big takeaway that smacked me when I was looking into traditions of memory in the Buddhist teachings, because the question is because of their thinking on the self being illusory, that immediately moves it out of the Western tradition, which is very much surrounding the individual soul. And so it's a very straightforward thing to say, whose memory is it? Well, it must be mine because I have it. And in fact, my identity comes from it being mine. Whereas in these traditions, it really does raise the question, inevitably, if you're going to train a memory, well, whose memory is it? And if it's something more than simply your own memory, and indeed the whole idea that you have a memory is in and of itself illusory, it's a thing I don't like. As my friend Tim used to say, he's like, why the hell did why, if I'm just a drop from the ocean, why would I ever want to return to it? You know, if I fought my way up to this sense of self, it is an accomplishment. And why would I want to, and how even could I go back to something other than that, unless it's coincident. But anyway, leave that aside. In the West, we have the notion that it's our memory, and our very ourness, our being who and what we are, is connected to it being our memory and us having one that is uniquely and individually ours. And for them, they don't have that. They do have some things that are very similar in terms of how they teach memory. There's focus, attention, there's repetition, there's a similarity and association. There's a heavy use of lists. And hell, they probably got acronyms for them, like all the people trained in the military. Limited sets, very much like the Western traditions. And brevity, you know, less standing for more. They've got this basic concept of smrti, which is memory or mindfulness. So that's active presence and prudence, mindfulness. But whose memory is it? On the one hand, you could say there's a cool advantage to it, in the sense, it's, my friend Tim also told me, he's like, among the old Buddhists, their thing when confronted with a problem was not solving the problem. It was simply remembering the solution. And that only makes sense outside a Western context, if you assume that your memory wasn't really yours and it's somehow coextensive. You can get some of that with the Jungian idea of a collective unconscious. But I've always felt that model is particularly weak also, because it assumes that you go down to a low level to find what is shared as the lowest common denominator, and that it's unconscious. Whereas I tend to think that within me, there is an individual superconscious that has within it everything that ever could be in any collective unconscious. So yeah, what was the original question? It had to do
about how it's affected by us kind of like offloading our brains into computers as it is. Like
right. Whose memory is it?
Like I can't even remember if I have a stream with somebody unless I put it into my digital calendar.
Well, that's just
I'm just like taking a big L over here. Like...
No, that's just atrophy. And you could just as easily step back from that and do things in different ways that if they didn't bring you back to square one, they would at least strengthen those things that you think are weak right now. That's just the thing where you get the muscle by using it, right? You got to exercise your liver with whiskey.
Things, I have an elephantine memory.
Yes. Well, I'm not. You just opened up the that's Hell's Gate right there.
Don't counter signal me.
Yeah, or talk to women about what they do and don't remember. So yeah, let's just leave that be. But the point is where you say that there's that weakening and that it's no longer your memory. Think about these ideas like the cloud, right?
Yep.
There's no greater lie. There's no greater lie. Oh, upload it to the cloud. Oh, it's just floating up there. It's a cloud. No, it means put all your data on my fucking server. That's what it means. It's not on your machine anymore. It's not your software. That cool Samsung TV you got, you think it's yours? Try to watch it when they've decided that you're going to have an update, right? You try to turn the damn TV on and you're sitting there while it updates and you're like, I thought it was mine. And they're like, no, it's not yours. So the first thing that I would warn is that all of it's a lie. So you could think to yourself, will I be a part of some singularity because I've been uploaded into the cloud? Well, first off, all that terminology is a lie. It's just their server or servers, right? But let's assume momentarily that there's some point at which it can sit up in some strange geometrically interlinked Tesla cloud or something, right? It really would be a cloud. Well, then I think that just takes us in the direction of the Buddhism, where the notion is whose memory is it? Because if that's the place you go live and it's a singularity, well, you can almost steal a march on the need to make human beings fungible and fundamentally interchangeable so that everybody can be pumped into one of their pneumatic tubes with piles of garbage behind them to be blown thousands of miles through the little tubes and come crawling out of the refuse to take up their position at some bank teller's counter or, some state sanctioned injection site. Everybody can be transferred everywhere else. They have no connection with anything. Well, they can steal a march on that by sort of, there's no need to worry about making people interchangeable if there's only one person.
Yeah. And
listen to them talk about things like the singularity. The most disgusting thing about this is that someone like me, the ruins of a classical education, the garbage that once upon a time could have been a real education. I could have been a Renaissance man, but no, I was born in this dark, stinking, and miserable age.
So you're a YouTuber instead.
You keep talking that way, I'm going to go sit in the dark, listen to Black Sabbath, and cut myself because you're
already sitting in the dark. You're halfway there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to come to you for any kind of comfort in the future. Yeah. You're just most stabbing.
People don't.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's a way. You've just screwed everything up.
I'm so sorry.
There's a way in which, by moving towards what they call this singularity, they obviate any need to make the people interchangeable. So again, it just seems to be a poisonous mess. And what was I saying about ruins of a classical education? That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Enough about you. What do you? Enough about me. What do you think about me? The problem here is that we're having these discussions about things that have already been hashed out. They've already been thought through. They've just been thought through by people and in ways that are no longer fashionable. And so we're all sitting here being forced to reinvent the wheel amidst the garbage piles of what was once a glorious culture. Whereas if we all had proper educations, myself included, I'm ashamed that I don't, then it would be very easy for us to see clearly what they're doing here. They're trying to promote the idea of making us all a single person. You can come at it from the idea of saying out of the many one, and say, well, let's just make us all fucking interchangeable. Or you can come at it from the other direction and say out of the one many, well, the singularity achieves the same thing because it's all one thing. And that comes down to the universalism and the imposition of uniformity that usually is moving beneath the might-ridden, half-rotten wing of universalism. So yeah, I think essentially all we're doing is, in this dark age, it's a reverse spiral rather than an upward pointing spiral. So it is cyclical, but it also is a devolution. And so we've come back around to confront these sort of these same questions that have been dealt with by other religions. And you know, if you want to be a good techno Buddhist, where you don't even have anything that you can carry away from this time, as we parachute down through the spheres, high altitude, low opening, and come hurtling towards a womb and come out through blood and muscular contractions into manifestation to gasp our first breath of air. You know, we pay with the coin of our life to be here. We take it's like a Victrola machine. You know how the old discs for the record players used to get made? There was just a cone, and you shouted into it, and it went down to a needle, and it vibrated, and it cut the groove. And if you ever wanted to play it back, you just stick a needle in it, and in reverse, the vibration comes up the line to the horn, and you can hear it playing, right? We pay with the coin of our life to cut that groove in the via the Akashic record player, right? And that's all I ever can carry away, is these ephemeral experiences. And yet these things, these horror show slobberers, want to deprive us of this in the attempt to either transform us in the least important way externally, and certainly by making us fungible, interchangeable. Another sort of disgusting aspect of this. I've gone all over the place. Please bring this back around as a host so that I'm not yeah, it's a mess.
No, I mean, it's all very interesting. There's so many tangents to go off onto with this subject, though, because it touches on so many different things. And I mean, I think fundamentally, you know, we're building a society that has us, you know, in a position where we're living our lives to serve machines rather than machines serving us. Where, you know, if we haven't already passed that point, I think we're very, very quickly approaching it. I mean, even just things like building cities to the scales of cars rather than actual human beings. You know, the fact that, you know, we can't go anywhere without having a panic attack if we don't have our smartphone with us and things like that. Like, it's all in service to machines. And I think that problem's only going to continue to get worse. And then, of course, if you start having people uploading their consciousness to machines or integrating machines into them, I think, you know, the organic is going to start serving the mechanistic in an even more profound and entangled way. So, and I mean, all that comes back to, like, well, they're, you know, trying to avoid death. This is their form of immortality. And then the reason that I asked, you know, at what point do we not become human anymore, or do we lose our soul? You know, well, that in itself is a type of death. And so are they actually avoiding death in that case? Is it just they're so afraid of material death, and then they're doing everything they can to separate themselves from materiality. It's like, but that's what normal death does. Like, why don't you just die like a normal person? If you really hate your material existence so much, but they're so afraid of it because, of course, they don't believe in anything beyond that. I think they think you just go in the ground and rot and that's it, and you never, you're just kind of snuffed out of existence. And why they find, even if I believed that premise myself, and there was a time when I did believe that back in my atheist days, I just believed there was nothing else. I still didn't feel like struck with some strong aversion to death. It's like, oh, it's just like, okay, well, if that's what happens, and that's what happens, and you'll be dead and you won't know, so who cares? Um, their fear of death and the lengths to which they will go to avoid it seems very pathological to me. Oh, you're muted.
Many have wished for that in the past, so you should celebrate it. Yeah, it seems to me that that is the pathology. It's not just a pathology. I mean, I look at it. I've now had enough of my family members, that were close to me die, that I've seen what happens. Even had close friends die. Tim happily I didn't get to see any of the heavy immersion in one's own interiority that seems to come with this transition. But I saw it with my father. He started to go into crazy places, talking about what was happening. They call it delusion or whatever. But there's an old thing from Rumi where they talk about how Azrael, the angel of death, appeared before the Persian poet Rumi and said, "I have come to inquire what my master desires of me." That death is a positive thing. That death is your servant. And, it's the dweller on a threshold. And think about all your mothers and all your fathers going back through all your ancestry. I mean, think of them. You're still here now, which means that train of all those who lived, it's in the millions? I don't know. I mean, how many are your mothers and fathers? And every one of them, took the dirt nap. Every one of them, and I love it. It's an old phrase from the Iliad. They have it in the Queen song, but it's one of the oldest metaphors: to bite the dust. Fell down with an open mouth and bit the earth. All of them. Every single one of them. My little terrified granny, dead. I got to see her in the casket there with all the makeup on her and stuff, and all the ridiculous absurdities that people come up with as a way to try to hide this transition from themselves. That you mentioned it's almost pathological, and I guess what I'm trying to do is illustrate that I think it is the pathology.
Yeah, there's this deep discomfort with death, especially in the West, and I think
we don't see it.
No, our existence is very sanitized. It's very, very hidden away. And the times when we do experience death, it is, as you say, they put makeup on it.
And particularly bad makeup.
Yes. Well, it's just very, I can't help but wonder if transhumanism is something that would have taken root in so many people's minds if we had a better relationship with death. Like we saw it, through like the last 2 years, where everybody was just like, let's literally just destroy the world to keep people from dying. And it's like, but we all have to die eventually. Like, it's not a bad thing. The reason we're born is so that we die. But there's just, they grasp so tightly to this life, and they don't even seem to like this life very much, but I guess it's all they feel like they have. It's like, you're on antidepressants and you complain about your life all the time, but you really don't want to die. Like, well, then maybe be happier about the life that you've got. I don't know. It just, like, there's just so many weird sicknesses of the mind and the spirit within the West. And this is, as you say, this fear of death may be the pathology.
It certainly seems to be at the root of what's driving them here in these ways. You've got this gerontocracy in the background. There's actually some of the old William Gibson stories, which really I only liked the first one of his main trilogy. The rest of them they just started to become all West Coast. But they had the idea of these ancient, by human standards, 200-year-old, 300-year-old rich people who'd managed to keep themselves alive. And I think we're beginning to see that now. They're terrified and they rule with that, with the benefit of the perspective on the one hand, and on the other hand, with the benefit of the wealth that they're able to accrue over 2 lifetimes instead of, say, all their competitors who've only accumulated that wealth over 1 lifetime. You can do that with a great house, so to speak, but you've got real issues with maintaining continuity of purpose and methods. When you have to extend it across generations, you might hit, every great dynasty has come up hard against not being able to have a male child, or come up hard against, the one proper inheritor of the mantle of the house is a fool, so the dead hand of the past cannot extend itself well. But when you have this new sort of transhumanist class, because that's another important thing to remember, the human growth hormone and everything else that people like Soros, or I'm only speculating here, I don't know, but he's got to be on all the various things that a billionaire can be on to extend his life. And whether that's, dealing with organ harvesting or treatments that he can go to some special island that's not in anybody's territorial waters to receive because it would otherwise be illegal. I file all that away under like Elizabeth Bathory shit, right? Like the idea that I'm not going to get old, so I'm going to bathe in the blood of virgins. I don't even want to know what these people really do in order to maintain themselves with their levels of wealth. But it seems to drive them all at this point. It makes me think, back to the idea of people who once upon a time would be very happy indeed to have a glorious death, and not, I'm not interested in a glorious death at the moment. I hope when it comes, it's not as sad and ridiculous as it usually is. But
well, I mean, elves are immortal anyway, so I think you're good.
Yeah. I wish I were, and it accelerates.
Do you actually wish you were immortal?
I was just about to say no, but that's that whole thing about the Christians. They're always saying, "Oh Lord, take me," but not today, So, I'm not ready to leave yet. I'm still fascinated by the great leopard print texture of manifestation. There's a great wild jungly pattern of coming into this place.
Strike me as more of a zebra print kind of guy.
No.
I could see that on you.
No, there is no zebra. Oh, the black and white thing. But yeah, no. No, it's like a great carpet. It's a great rich tapestry that this place is. And I'm still pleased enough with it that I want to stay here. But there will come a time when death will come. Hopefully later than sooner. But death will come. And with any luck, it will say, I have come to inquire what my master desires from me. And I believe that is what death is for. And so that's the craziest thing. All of this transhumanist bullshit, other than just human imbecility, which is always available in abundance, it seems mostly empty cans tied to the tail of a cat. There's just a beast is running like a freak from the sound of what's pursuing it, and it's a bunch of cans tied to its tail. That's what it all really seems to be. And the horrifying thing is that it looks like we've got nothing but more of it in our immediate future.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have time for any questions, or do you need to run?
No, I have time. Whatever you like.
All right, we'll see what we got for the chat. I just kind of told him last call for questions here. So Vingle asks, can the circle be unbroken? I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. Do you know?
Wow, I'm trying to process whether that's a line from a movie.
Maybe he can clarify that for us.
Yeah.
Some people don't trust you because you have long hair.
Yeah. Ask me if I
care. We know you don't. You don't care about what anyone thinks of you. That's
no. I just don't care what anyone thinks about me having long hair. The people who are close to me, I concern myself with their opinions.
So what do we think are the odds of AI gaining human level consciousness?
I'll let you do that one.
You can answer it as well. He's asking both of us, but I don't know enough about where the technology is at, but based on my understanding, I'm not sure that they'll actually be able to achieve like human consciousness. They might be able to achieve something approximating human intelligence, but not consciousness, not sentience.
As far as I know, science cannot at this point properly account for consciousness at all. So as best I can tell, they have no damn idea what's going on. And most of what we hear about AI and the rest, it's a computer running a bunch of algorithms.
Yeah. Did you ever go down the rabbit hole of the band Current 93?
Yes, there's actually a clip on my channel called Neo Folk that I did with Martin Lickmitz. And it's a great discussion. He and I were both into such music back in the day. And yeah, I briefly corresponded with David Tibet. He answers all his mail. I had heard that back in the day. And when I wrote him, he wrote me back. I went down the Current 93 rabbit hole. My favorite album is Earth Covers Earth. And my favorite song is Hourglass for Diana. And yeah, and I dealt with Temple of Psychic Youth and the Topi people and Coil. I actually bought a Austin Spare drawing from John Balance. Yeah, I was around that world back in the day. Yes, I did go down that rabbit hole.
And someone else said only plebs had short hair in the traditional world. So there you go.
Now, short hair is another one.
Aristocracy.
No, I shave my head too. The problem is that my hair is white with lighter gray or darker gray splotches, white, gray, and then a few dark splotches. So if I shave
the Dalmatian print, not the zebra print.
If I shave my head, I look like a mangy dog because I look like it's white and black spots, you know?
Are you suggesting you don't normally look like a mangy dog?
I'm just going to let that go on by. The point is though that I've worked as a bouncer for years, and I'm not about to like be a bouncer with long hair. I'll get dragged across the floor. Like my life, nobody cares, but I'm going to tell you anyway. My entire life, for the most part, my hair was either shaved or long, because in the case of shaving it, I don't have to pay. Nothing is as disgusting to me as paying someone to cut my hair. It just seems absolutely obscene. So either I shave it.
More disgusting to you.
What?
Morph.
Like what? Fucking morph. I saw that going on in the background, and everyone can kiss my ass. All of you are vermin. Morph.
Can we get a morph in the chat for Semiogogue?
Yeah, no.
Well, some people liked your stream on the neo-folk stuff, so that's good.
I saw it. Good.
Question: Frank Herbert or Isaac Asimov?
Frank Herbert, man. Isaac Asimov, I wouldn't even like scrape off my shoe. Like I've actually found in some of Tim's books, there's one odd random Asimov sci-fi book, and I don't even think I'm going to bother reading it. Many of them are just going to go into if I had a wood burning stove, I'd put the Asimov in it. So yeah, Herbert, man, absolutely. Herbert talks about fucking Chakobsa. people don't know this. He took that word Chakobsa. It's a secret hunting language of the Circassians. And he took that word and used it with his Fremen. So he dug deep into the lore.
All right. Doesn't transhumanism prove that consciousness is independent of the body? How does the atheist reconcile this? Doesn't transhumanism prove consciousness is independent of the soul? How does the dualist reconcile this?
You want to take that one?
It's a big question. I don't really feel like we have the time to really like deeply delve into it. I mean, consciousness can be independent of the body because obviously like the body houses consciousness here in the material world, but the consciousness needs to be able to persist after death, and the soul is the vehicle for which it will do that. So and that's kind of like my short answer.
And I would add that space is the mechanism whereby the soul accomplishes this, because it gives isness. It gives one's own isness, one's own sense of having an identity, a place to be. We only have consciousness because we can differentiate subject and object, self from other, and form a sense of ourselves as having a limit. And all the rest of isness is by nature infinite and limitless. And so the body, as I pointed out before, with the ability to create an analog of space within us by borrowing this material from the lending library, we can create a sense of depth and space and our own impressions of there being space, which is like the Akashic record player cutting the groove. And it goes into our memory, which is eternal, which gives us a reflected reality, which can persist only insofar as it reflects that which actually is. But we have to have a place to be. It's like the old line from Archimedes, give me a place levered long enough and a place to stand. Well, you need a place to stand. And when your body goes to a Morrison's for maggots waiting to open, when it goes back into the dirt, you have to have some place to be. And the trick there is within the soul to make a place. And it must have space. And if you can, through a strange sort of alchemy, through some strange process, if you can create a space within yourself, then you will have a place to be once you no longer have this, but only if you have made that place consciously and you can take up residence there. But then you raise all sorts of other, like you said, there's not enough time for that. Here's the short version. That would be creating an analog of a body in the sense that the sense of being in a place is with being within the body of God. That's going to be very heretical for some Christian denominations. So, your mileage may vary.
You might have to do a whole stream on space.
Well, I'm still working on that as the great puzzle of my existence. So yeah, I'd be lucky to try and fit that on YouTube. But the idea is you make a body for yourself and you make it as an analog based on what you've experienced here, which is why we got this from the lending library anyway. But it raises all sorts of questions because go look at my stream on sleep and death. Because I talk about there how Tibetan dream yoga is supposed to teach you techniques so that you can maintain your consciousness from when you go to sleep to when you wake up.
Oh, cool.
The issue there, though, is that it's not that you don't go to sleep. You have to go to sleep or you didn't do it. But it's a transition of consciousness, and to maintain your awareness through that cycle in one end and out the other, rather than having it seem to turn off and turn on again. That's relatively unchallenging, but still so difficult that anyone would have some challenge doing it. Well, the dream yoga is said, you can find it in Wentz, Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrines, Evans Wentz. That is said to be a training wheel for the Bardo yoga. And the Bardo yoga is the maintenance of your consciousness from when you die to when you're born again. The thing is that that's vastly more difficult, because you're going to come in a different time and space, or maybe another quote unquote plane, right? And what you left might have been a 60-year-old woman on her deathbed, and you might come back as you'll come back as an infant Mongolian warlord. You know, how do you connect those things? And look at children in a cradle. They've got little objects that hang over them with colors that help their little eyes to develop depth perception and get a sense of separating themselves from what they're viewing. And it takes years. So I'm all over the place. My apologies. Thank you for bearing with me so patiently, Kat, and all the viewers. But the point is, I guess I'm saying there would have to be a body of some kind for there to be consciousness. Otherwise, there is no space and no distinction of self from other, therefore no limits which permit you to be something that is not something else, and therefore to have some sense of identity. So I'm not convinced that there is any consciousness independent of a body of some kind. I simply don't believe it. If you take a look at all the mystical traditions, whether or not you've got some Blavatsky-esque type, physical, etheric, and astral body or whatever, or you look at the idea of an immortal soul, there's always a place for you to be. Even with the so-called astral projection, they posit another body that is more subtle that one occupies. And even if you're a soul that takes up residence amongst the holy hosts singing Hosanna for all eternity, you could argue at that point that you've been incorporated into the ecclesia, the isness of the community of believers, which still gives you a body. You're still resting on a foundation. So yeah, I don't believe there is consciousness independent of the body. If there is, it's simply that you've moved to another body or withdrawn into your interior landscape until such time as the beast with two backs creates great friction and heat in a womb that is a kind of gravity that brings your soul like a moth to the light of two rutting figures, and the egg and the sperm meet, and you're trapped.
This is a family channel.
Trapped again in a womb. There was nothing vulgar there.
A family channel, not a making a family channel. But
somebody just said consciousness.
Agree.
Someone just said consciousness doesn't require a body; it is the first cause. Consciousness as the first cause is simply all you've done is offset the discussion to the level of God, where there's still that same foundation you rest upon. So whatever. Anyway, sorry.
I don't see that comment. You must be
that's Windhammer.
Oh, okay.
Ban him now.
Question for you: Pound or Yeats?
I haven't read Pound yet, which I'm sure will be shocking to everyone. I haven't. So Yeats, it'll have to be for the moment because he's the only poet among those two that I've read. But I dig Yeats has some real moments. He has some real moments.
Yeah. I'm not really a poetry person myself.
Shame on you.
Well, it needs music, and then it's lyrics, and then it's better.
Yeah, fair enough. It's a song. A song is a kind of poetry, but still, shame on you.
Do you have an opinion on Kundalini?
Yeah, and a bunch of books on that shit too. I believe there is something there, and I believe I have felt parts of it. I would not say that I have activated my Kundalini and it is reared up out of the base root chakra and it has climbed the pathway through the chakras and the nadis, both Ida and Pingala, until it arrives here with the great flowering of consciousness in Sahasrara, the 1,000-petal lotus. I think it's there. I think it refers to something that does exist and that can be experienced or harnessed. I believe I've had some tastes of it myself, but I am no expert.
All right. Silmarillion or Iliad? I have to say, I actually would probably choose Iliad just because as much as I like Tolkien and I like Middle Earth, I actually don't love him as a writer. Like, I don't love his writing style, and the Silmarillion is particularly tedious.
Yeah, I have a friend actually who's
You
who
don't
may
have
he
friends.
kiss my ass. I have a friend actually. If he comes to visit me and hears me talk bad about the Silmarillion, he literally will slap me. Like it'll be two 50-year-old men, and he'll be like, "Bitch!" Right. So I don't want that. And also, I want to stay on good terms with people like Apostolic Majesty, who is a great fan of Tolkien. I love Tolkien
Hey,
stuff.
I'm a fan of Tolkien too. I can just admit when I don't particularly enjoy.
And I have not read the Silmarillion yet, but I am just going to say that Tolkien's writing bores me. I appreciate and respect him, and I recognize.
I love the
skill.
story. I don't like the writing.
There are not enough sword fights. I'm a Robert E. Howard guy. I want to crush the monster, drop a rock on its head, kill it with a broadsword, smack somebody with a chicken bone, and like throw the woman over your shoulder at the end. I'm very male and simple in that respect. And so the whole time I'm like, how many fucking pages am I going to have to read about Tom Bombadil? I'm kiss my ass, you know? So
yeah,
sorry.
I'm people might be surprised to hear me say that I'm not a huge fan of Tolkien's writing. As much like love the characters, love the story, love the message, love Middle Earth. I just don't want to read him writing about it. If somebody else who was a better writer could write the same thing, that would be great.
Well, I'm not going to go that far. That's some addlepated woman thing. I don't know what you're talking about there.
Getting into the realm of fan fiction, maybe.
Yeah, and fan fiction next to Tolkien. I mean, Tolkien was a badass scholar, and he definitely touched the heart of whatever the archetypes of these things are or were. So there is no fan who will ever write anything equivalent.
Well, it was the same. Like someone says you can't be a Tolkien fan and not have read the Silmarillion. I have read it. I just didn't like it, and I didn't finish it because I didn't like it.
Well, he's probably screwing with me because I haven't, you know.
It's for me, it's in the same. I put Dune in the same category. I liked the world. I liked the story. I liked where it was going. I just didn't love the way that Frank Herbert wrote it. And I remember when I first was trying to read that as a teenager, because the boy I liked said it was his favorite. So of course I had to read it. And I got through the first 4 books and I'm just like, I just can't do this anymore. This is just, it was an exercise in torture. And I'm like, I would just like this story so much better if the writing were better. And I think it's a personal preference.
Kirill Petrov just said, I actually enjoyed the part about Tom Bombadil. Could you block him, please? Anyone who likes, I'm joking, but anyone who likes Tom Bombadil should be blocked. Yeah.
Well, and that's why we're doing this on my channel and not yours, because you block people.
Yeah. Happily.
Actually, I don't know of anybody actually that you've blocked. Apparently, I'm talking blasphemy over here.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm going to get in a fight with a bunch of these people. Minoan, who I would not block, great channel follower, been around forever. Talking about can't read Herbert, awful writing. Whatever.
I feel the same. Like, and Elias Seal saying Dune is almost nonfiction. I feel like Tolkien is almost nonfiction too. But, yeah. So, and speaking of Howard, have you read any Breckenridge Elkin stories? I have not. Have you?
Nope.
I haven't even heard of it.
Is that one of his characters? Like his, because I mean, I've read some of the other stories, set in Cull, certainly Solomon Kane, but yeah, and some other one too. Yeah.
Tolkien said of Dune, I dislike Dune with some intensity, and in that unfortunate case, it is much the best and fairest to another author to keep silent and refuse to comment. Ouch. It's a redneck character by Howard is the I can't even remember the name now.
Right,
the previous comment.
Something. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. All right. Well, I think that's the end of the questions, and I've taken up probably enough of your time making you talk about all kinds of weird sci-fi stuff, which you probably secretly liked. But, no. So anyway, thank you very much for coming on. Do you want to tell people where they can find you or shill anything you've got going on, any books you have coming out or anything like that?
Yeah, first thing I want to say is if anybody's over here who doesn't know Kat, who came over to check out me on her channel. I mean, everybody probably knows about you, but if they don't, consider subscribing. She's got great stuff. So yeah, and check out Uberfolk, her band, for sure. For me, yeah, what do I have coming up? I think I have something. Let me look here. I have I have the propane gas rednecks coming by tomorrow. Y'all don't
Surely you
need to
have
know
some
that.
good streams coming up at least.
Yes, I have.
I see you always on other people's channels. You're a very in-demand guy, so at least tell people where they might find you for those.
I've got an upcoming stream with Prudentialist on Sunday the 26th. We're going to be talking about some geopolitics stuff.
And
then
for anyone who doesn't know, Semiogogue is excellent for the geopolitics.
I hope I can get back into the saddle again. It's been a while, and my main partner for that bit the dust. So yeah, I'm working on it. But Prude is great. Check out his channel. That's coming up on the 26th, 4 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be talking about that little corridor that runs up to Kaliningrad that just got partially blocked. I'm going to be talking to Chris Dangerfield, who's going to come crawling out of the degenerate woodwork of Cambodia. I look forward to speaking to him. He's a fun guy. I've talked to him before. That'll be on semiotics and meaning and writing and that kind of stuff. That's coming up on Tuesday the 28th. It's gonna be very late at night. It's a weird thing where we have to get I think he's 12 hours ahead of me or something.
Oh yes.
So follow me on YouTube, follow me on BitChute, Odyssey, Telegram, Twitter, and buy my damn books. There's a book of poetry called Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth, and there is a sci-fi book set in the year 2076 called Vinculum. It's about a book thief.
I still need to read this.
Yeah, what you need to read is Eros and Magic in the Renaissance by Johann Kuliani.
I'm working on it. Just give me another 2 years, okay?
Yeah. What have you read, a chapter?
Well, you haven't read the... I'm going to start from the beginning, actually, and we will do a stream on it, but you still haven't read the book that I recommended in turn. So...
What
Eros
was
and the
that?
Mysteries of Love. Evela's Eros.
Is that the his thing on the metaphysics of sex?
Yes, that would be the one.
So it's two different titles? No.
The Metaphysics of Sex is the subtitle. The proper title is Eros and the Mysteries of Love.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I'm going to read Evela. It's going to happen. And when I do, I will then delve deeply into your considerable body of work analyzing his stuff. So, yes, I'm going to get to Evela soon, but I've got so much that must come first. So, yeah, well, thank you. That's my
Well, that's why I make videos about it, so that lazy people like you who don't have time to read can still pretend they've read Evela.
No, I would never pretend I'd read something. Forget about it.
What is it about you that makes you so easy to pick on? Why?
No, you're from the Midwest. This is a total Midwestern thing. Come down south, man, and you're gonna, you're the Midwestern. I don't understand you people. I don't know where. I don't understand. All you do is pick on me. Yes.
It's just, there's just something about you that makes it really fun.
Yeah. Great. I think. Thanks.
Well, I've got on Wednesday night, the next episode of Revolt is finally premiering after like a whole year-long hiatus because of moving, and also it was just a really hard chapter to do, but we've got like a nearly hour-long episode ready to come out, so that'll be 7 p.m. Eastern this Wednesday. Thank you to Virtuous Straight for putting that in the chat like that. And yeah, obviously you guys all know where to find me because you're here on my channel, but definitely go check out Semiogogue, check out his other good videos, of which, you know, most of them are good videos. I don't think I've seen one of yours that I didn't like. And I particularly enjoy just putting on your random late night streams where you're just having these long man rants about something totally random. Like your one about the, what was it, like Lullabies of the Devouring Mother or something? It was, that was particularly funny. I'd recommend that. It was actually really good too. And I immediately was just like, oh yes, I have heard that phrase over and over in television and film. But yeah, so everyone go check out Semiogogue, and if you don't, you're in big trouble. And come back here Wednesday night for the Revolt stream. Look forward to seeing you all. Thank you for hanging out with us, and that is it.